It's time to get started with part 3 of our training. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will go ahead and get started. And Allie, would you change the slide? Once again, your presenters for the training today are Sean Vondracek, that is myself. I have Erica Erder with us and Allie Lampman, and we are your presenters for today. Let's review those housekeeping tips. Please use the chat box to ask your questions. We will not be answering these during the presentation as we want to keep it moving along. And we will answer your questions at the end of the presentation, and you will be muted during the presentation, but please unmute yourself if you have a question during the question and answer time. We encourage that because we want to hear from you. Next slide. Your training certificate is in your packet, and we are starting on page 64 of your handout packet. And this is part 3 of the Zoom training. You will be earning 3 hours of continuing education today. Please complete your certificate. If a number of you are watching together, you can list everyone on the same training certificate, have them sign that they attended the training with you today, and that's your documentation. We ask that you stay till the end, but if you need to jump off the Zoom earlier, then please indicate the number of hours that you are with us this morning. And we're going to be covering a lot of important information today, so please plan to stay till the end if possible. Let's move to the next slide. The slide deck and handout packet were emailed to you. They're also available on the Nutrition Services website under training. And we ask that you pull that up now. Once again, we are on page 64 of your handout packet. It starts with the training certificate, and then we will be moving through the packet. Next slide. So what have we covered the last 2 days? Well, on Tuesday, part 1 of the Zoom, we talked about meal pattern and service. We reviewed the food-based meal patterns for lunch and breakfast. We talked about the 5 food components that are required, which are the meat alternate, fruits, vegetables, grains, and milk. We talked about the different grade group requirements of the programs, K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. We talked about that this is not only based on food components, serving meals that are based on food components, but also on meeting nutrient standards required for breakfast and lunch. We discussed the importance of having required signage posted for students to be able to recognize a reimbursable meal. We talked about a serving option called offer versus serve, which allows students to turn down certain food items, food components, as long as they have the requirements on their tray. And for both breakfast and lunch, they have to have at least a half a cup of fruit and or vegetable on their tray for a reimbursable meal. We discussed the importance of having an accurate point of service meal count. That is where a count is taken that the student is actually present with the reimbursable meal after all food components have been offered to the student. In part 2, yesterday, we discussed the required documentation of the program. We started with labels, what labels you need to maintain on site. We discussed standardized recipes. We talked about the food buying guide as a tool to use in ordering food and planning. We discussed the importance of HACCP, which is Hazardous Analysis Critical Control Points, your food safety plan, and the requirements of the documentation that needs to be maintained for your food safety plan. We went into depth about the importance of documenting meal pattern and food production on your daily production records for both breakfast and lunch, and keeping those records on site and readily retrievable. And finally, we discussed what records need to be retained. And we have a 3-year plus the current year retention for all records. Other than HACCP. HACCP is 1 year plus the current, unless your local health department has informed you of something different. And if your school district has a longer retention policy for records, then you need to comply with the most restrictive. And the reason for the record retention is you have to maintain all of your food records, your production records, your recipes, your labels, because they substantiate that the meals you served met meal pattern requirements. And so record retention is very important. And now let's move on to part 3 of our training. Well, after today's training, you will be able to meet the requirements for meal service for PreK, the PreK meal pattern. We're going to be discussing the after-school care snack and the special milk program. And then we're going to go into depth about other program requirements that you need to be aware of. You're going to be able to develop menus and procedures for meeting all program requirements. And we're going to go into detail about what record-keeping requirements that you need to maintain for these programs, and then summarize what we've learned in the last 3 days. So let's move to the next slide. We're going to start our presentation today with providing meals for preschoolers in the school meal program. So I know that many of you have pre-K programs. They have grown in number over the years, and most schools anymore have a pre-K program at their school. And pre-K has its own meal pattern, and we're going to discuss how you distinguish if you are following the pre-K meal pattern or if you are able to follow the school meals pattern for those pre-K students. So let's move to the next slide. As I just mentioned, we have the school meals, and the portions are based on grades K through 5. And then we have the child and adult care food program, and that's referred to as the CACFP program. So another acronym that we're going to be talking about. And the portions are based on the child's age as opposed to the grade groups in the school meals pattern. So pull out your handout. On page 64, you will see the child and adult care food program meal pattern. And as you can see at the top, we have the ages listed and the food components. So let's move to the next slide. So which meal pattern do you follow? Well, it all depends on where and when the child eats. Well, excuse me, for the school breakfast program and the school lunch program, the meal pattern can be followed when preschoolers are served in the cafeteria at the same time as other students. So those students are intermingled with other students in different grades. So we can't tell the difference between a pre-K student and a kindergartner, first grader, or second grader. They're all intermingled as they go through the line. The server can't distinguish a pre-K student from a grade school student. And so this is called commingling. It would be very difficult for a server to pull out different serving utensils to serve the pre-K student and then pull out other utensils to serve the next grade school student right after them. So commingling is where they are mixed together. Well, for the CACFP, you must follow the CACFP meal pattern when the preschoolers, when they're not commingled. Okay, so when they come in their own grade or age group, grade group, where they come in separately from the other students and go through the serving line, or when they eat in the classroom, that would be considered not commingled because you have a group of students together. You have a group of your pre-K students together. They're all served at the same time, and you would need to follow the CACFP meal pattern for those students. Or if they come in as a group and take their trays to the classroom, or if you wheel down the meals to the pre-K classroom, they're not commingled, and you would have to use the CACFP meal pattern. So let's move to the next slide. So as you look at that meal pattern, you're going to see that the serving sizes are much more appropriate for those age groups. Now, as we look at lunch, for example, we can see that the portion size for vegetables and fruit, it's for ages 3 through 5, it's 1/4 of a cup of vegetable, 1/4 of a cup of fruit. Now, that's much more reasonable for those little children, those 3 through 5, as opposed to the school meal, lunch meal pattern, where we require 3/4 cup of vegetable daily and 1/2 cup of fruit. So much more reasonable portion sizes for those pre-K students. I do want to point your attention to the meat alternate category. And if you remember, which I hope you all do, that the minimum daily requirement for K through 5 is 1 ounce of meat alternate. We have a weekly requirement, but the daily requirement for meat alternate is 1 ounce. But when we look at the pre-K meal pattern for lunch, the daily requirement is 1.5 ounces. So it is a larger daily requirement than for our K through 5 grades, K through 8 grades. So wanted to point that out. So if you have been cutting sandwiches in half for your pre-K students, you may not be meeting the meat alternate requirement. If we have a chicken patty that credits for 2 ounces of meat alternate and we cut it in half, that's only 1 ounce of meat alternate. So wanted to draw your attention to that. That is the only component that has a larger daily serving size as opposed to the school meals program for lunch. So let's move to the next slide. So the CACFP preschool meal pattern is based on the same required components as the school lunch, school breakfast. Breakfast requires 3 components and lunch requires 5 components. Now, as we look at our chart, our handout, we can see that after breakfast, after lunch, breakfast says must serve all 3 components for a reimbursable meal. For lunch, must serve all 5 components for a reimbursable meal. There is no offer versus serve in the pre-K meal pattern. Next slide. So let's dive into the different food components. For children 3 through 5 years of age, Only unflavored 1% or skim milk can be served. They cannot have flavored milk. So only our white 1% or skim milk. In the CACFP and both the school meal patterns, water must be offered at meals. And we talked about that in day 1 or part 1, the requirement to have water available to the children, the students, must be offered at meals. And cups must be provided. So wanted to point that out again. We talked about that in part 1. Next slide. The meat alternate options, tofu and yogurt, including soy yogurt, can be served in the CACFP. Yogurt must contain no more than 15 grams of sugar per 4-ounce serving. So a half a cup of yogurt equals 1 ounce of meat alternate. So maybe by now you're sensing, well, they can't have flavored milk. We're limiting the sugar content in yogurt, which are all things that are important for our preschool students. We don't want to overexpose sweetness to our students. Overall, the meat alternate quantities credit the same as the school lunch meal pattern. Let's move to the next slide. Fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are separate meal components. For ages 3 through 5, the portion size is a 1/4 cup for fruit and a 1/4 cup for vegetable. And this is kind of unique in the CACFP pre-K meal pattern, is that I can substitute a vegetable for my fruit. So I can serve a half a cup of vegetable to those students, and it must be from 2 different vegetables. So it's a footnote on the preschool meal pattern chart. So for example, if I chose to serve a 1/4 cup of green beans and a 1/4 cup of mashed potatoes, that would take the place of the fruit. I still have to serve the 1/4 cup of vegetable, but I'm replacing maybe the mashed potatoes for my fruit that day. So that's kind of unique with this meal pattern. It has to be 2 different vegetables. And there's a limit on juice, to serving only once a day per child. So if I offer juice for breakfast, I can't offer juice at lunchtime. Next slide. And we've talked about that a vegetable may be used to meet the entire fruit requirement at lunch. And we went into a little bit more detail about how to do that. And need to really emphasize it needs to be 2 different types of vegetables. Next slide. For children ages 1 through 18, only pasteurized 100% juice can be served to meet the vegetable or fruit requirement at 1 meal, including snack per day. So need to emphasize that no juice, no cocktails, make sure it's 100% juice. Next slide. Grains. At least 1 serving per day must be whole grain rich or whole grain. So as we look at our pre-K meal pattern chart, we can see for lunch that the grain requirement is like for a piece of bread, it's at 1/2 ounce. So that would be like a 1/2 slice of bread, so a much smaller portion. Breakfast cereals must contain no more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. So another limit on the amount of sugar that we are exposing these children to. Grain-based desserts do not credit in the pre-K meal pattern, the CACFP pre-K meal pattern, with the exception of muffins, quick breads, graham crackers, and animal crackers. Other dessert type items may not be served. So no donuts, sweet rolls, cereal, granola, or breakfast bars, toaster pastries, cookies, or cake. So once again, limiting that sugar content for our pre-K students. Next slide. So let's take a look at this slide. Minimum portions for ages 3 through 5 years at breakfast. We can see that we have our half-ounce equivalent of grain, which in this example would be our mini pancakes. We have a half a cup of sliced strawberries, because if we look at the breakfast meal pattern for pre-K, the requirement for 3 through 5 is a half a cup. And then the milk requirement is 3/4 cup. And you can serve more, you just can't serve less. So if you're pouring milk, then the minimum is 3/4 cup. If you want to pour more, that's fine. If you're sending cartons, the 1 cup or 8 fluid ounce carton is fine to send. Let's move to the next slide. So let's take a look at lunch. Once again, we've got our milk, and if you're sending cartons, that's fine. You can serve more, you just can't serve less than the 3/4 cup. We've got our taco, and our taco contains 1.5 ounces of ground beef. And we've got our 4th cup of lettuce, and we have our 8th cup of tomatoes, and we've got a 4th cup of roasted sweet potatoes. So we are substituting for our fruit, our vegetable. And then we have our flour tortilla. And the requirement for lunch is only that half-ounce equivalent. So we've got our reimbursable pre-K lunch meal. So let's move to the next slide. So serving snacks served during the school day to pre-K students cannot be claimed for reimbursement. There is no pre-K snack program in the school meals program. So those are non-reimbursable snacks. And you may need to follow the meal pattern for the CACFP due to licensing requirements, but there is no morning or afternoon snack reimbursement. So pre-K snacks cannot be paid for out of the school meals account. They're what we consider non-program meals. These will need to be billed to the pre-K program or the general fund, because money has to come back into the program for the cost of those snacks. So they can be treated like a catering, where you're billing for those snacks to either the pre-K program or the general fund, however your school has made that decision to pay for those snacks. But money has to come back into the school meals account for the cost of those snacks. Next slide. So other program considerations with operating a pre-K program: you have to have production records and label information to document compliance. And so we would be looking at your cereal labels, your yogurt labels. We'd be monitoring the menus to make sure that you're not offering dessert type items other than those that we've already talked about that can be served, like our graham crackers, our muffins, quick breads. We'd also be looking at your milk. What milk are you providing for those pre-K students? Remember, the requirement is unflavored skim or 1% milk. In the CACFP pre-K meal pattern, you're not allowed to fry. fry foods, and I know many, no one probably is frying anymore, but that is a requirement that no fried foods, like putting them in a fryer to fry. Offer versus serve is not an option when utilizing the pre-K meal pattern. And probably many of you are providing meals to the pre-K in their classroom in a family style meal service where you're sending bowls of food for those students. And so let's talk about what family style meal service is. So Allie, would you go to the next slide? So family style meal services with adult supervision, children are seated at tables and they serve themselves. So they're seated around a table and food is provided in bowls, and the bowls are passed around the table, and the adult at the table is encouraging the student to try the food, take a small amount, put it on their tray, and that bowl is passed several times around, encouraging the student or the child to take the food item. Each food component in sufficient quantity must be available for each child to select at least the minimum required portion size. So you have to provide the correct portion size for the number of students at the table. A child may decline all foods as long as each food component is offered more than once. So it's encouraging students to try the food items. Oftentimes the adult is eating as well at the table, modeling good eating habits by encouraging the student. So that's family style meal service. Next slide. So important resources. We've already talked about that the pre-K meal pattern has several limits on food items concerning the sugar content. And so there's a nice publication from USDA called Cereal Sugar Limit Guide and Yogurt Sugar Limit Guide. And these are included in your handout packet, as well as USDA has a very nice guide on serving meals to preschoolers that is also included in your handout packet for your reference. It does a nice job of explaining commingling versus non-commingled and the difference between the meal patterns. So I would encourage you to take a look at those publications that are included in your handout packet. So let's move to the next slide. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to Allie.
Thank you, Sean. So now that we've covered all the meal patterns and a lot of the documentation and program requirements, we're going to move on to some other topics and talk briefly about them. So the first one is civil rights. Civil rights is knowledge of rights and equal treatment for all. And so the USDA non-discrimination statement must be included in program information. The full statement must be included in the student handbook and at the end of the section that addresses the lunch program. So you can see in your handouts, if you turn to the next handout, the full statement is on that handout on the first page, and that includes everything in that box. The And Justice for All poster, which Sean talked about earlier, must be posted in the food service area and visible to the program participants. On your menu, it can be a single sentence. USDA is an equal opportunity provider. Schools are required to provide annual training to food service staff on civil rights. The documentation of the training must be kept on file. Documentation that all staff with a role in school meals have completed annual civil rights training. So let's look at the next slide to see where you can find some resources on our webpage for training. You can see the location on our webpage on the screen. So to find it, you would go to the school meals program, and then you would click Forms and Resources. and then select the civil rights topic. We have 2 trainings available on our website, a new training that was developed this year by our office, and then we also have the Institute of Child Nutrition, which has a great training on civil rights as well. So these are 2 trainings you can go and use for your annual civil rights training for your staff. Child nutrition program sponsors are responsible for training all frontline staff annually. These include all food service staff responsible for reviewing, approving free and reduced meal applications or income eligibility forms, point of service cashiers, teachers responsible for breakfast in the classroom, and regular program volunteers. New employees must receive training prior to involvement in program activities. So we will touch a little bit more. I have the form for the training where you can document it in a few slides. First, we're going to move on to special diets. So Americans with Disabilities Act made important changes to the meaning and interpretation of the term disability. The definition was expanded to include anything that affects a major life activity. These changes have made it easier for individuals to establish a disability. Most physical and mental impairments constitute a disability. It is important the food service staff is aware of the procedures for handling dietary requests. Food service must work with the households to best meet the nutritional needs of the student. Households must be informed of the process and procedure for requesting student meal accommodation requests. So on the next slide, we'll review those accommodations. In your handouts, you have a copy of the meal accommodation form and the medical statement form. As I talk through them, you can look at them. For accommodations within the meal pattern requirements, a request form completed by the parent is acceptable and no medical statement is required. An example here would be Johnny is allergic to strawberries, but the SFA is able to offer a different fruit whenever strawberries are menued, so that the meal pattern is still met. For accommodations outside of the meal pattern requirements, a request form needs to be completed by the parent, along with a medical note signed by a licensed healthcare provider. In this example, Abby has celiac disease and requires a gluten-free diet. A medical statement would be necessary, and the food service staff should work with the household to determine appropriate accommodations. It should be noted that a gluten-free grain item should be available for the student to select. It is not allowed to ask the student to just not take the grain offering within offer versus serve. And last, for lifestyle choices, consider offering menu options to accommodate. If utilizing offer versus serve, students can make a choice. It is not required to make a change for a lifestyle choice, but again, the recommendation is to accommodate if you can. An example for this one could be that the parent chooses that the student not take an item. It's not because of a medical or disability reason, it's just a choice. Working with special diets involves the school team. This could be principals, school nurses, classroom teachers, and of course your food service staff. Keep an open line of communication with the household about the special diet needs of their student. While a new medical statement is not required annually, you do need to check in with the household annually if their student is still needing the meal accommodation. If you are told of a different meal accommodation, request a new medical statement and remember to document the contact and what was discussed. The USDA has a guidance manual accommodating children with disabilities in the school meals program. This manual provides further guidance on addressing meal modifications, reimbursement for modified meals, procedural safeguards and training, and it also touches on the topic of non-disability situations. So be sure to check out the manual for further guidance. Now we'll move on to professional standards. On March 2nd, 2015, USDA Food and Nutrition Services published the professional standards for school nutrition professionals. The rule requires a minimum amount of annual training hours for all school nutrition program directors, managers, and staff. Required training topic areas will vary according to position and job requirements. These standards require a minimum number of annual continuing education training hours each year. Training hours earned in excess of the annual requirement may be applied to the school year directly preceding or directly following the date of the training. On the next slide, we have an example of this tracker. Also on the screen and in your handouts, you have the professional standards annual training requirements chart. If we want to take a look at the chart, you can see that there's different requirements for different levels in the positions. You can see on the screen the program director is required to have 12 hours of annual training. A program manager has 10 hours. And then program staff, whether they are regular program staff or at a vended site that work 20 hours or more per week, are required to have 6 hours annually. And program staff or vended staff that work less than 20 hours per week are required to have 4 hours annually. So let's take a look at that tracker. The training documentation is required and should include dates, first and last name of each person attending the training, signatures, and topic or topic titles. Again, Sean mentioned just previously that when you're documenting the training for today, make sure, for example, that each person attending the training is listed. We have both forms that can be found on our webpage. There is an annual training log, which you can use to track each employee's trainings, or there's a single event training log. So for example, if you did your required annual civil rights training and you wanted to use the single event training log, you could use that. And that is pictured on the screen. You would list all the employees' names, the hours that the training lasted, the training title, and the date. Be sure to retain these records on file as proof of professional standards that must be met annually. There are also minimum USDA hiring standards for new school nutrition program directors. On this slide, we see a snip of the USDA handout in your packet that shows part of the USDA hiring standards table. Hiring standards include education and experience requirements. New food service directors must also be certified in food safety, not more than 5 years prior to their starting date or within 30 days of their start date, according to the USDA hiring standard. It is mandatory the new directors obtain the certification by completing one of the courses listed on the screen: Serve Safe Manager training or Always Food Safe training. SFAs must hire staff that meet these standards and supply documentation upon request. I do want to give you a reminder that some of these certifications do expire. So if you are the director, be sure to check your current certification to ensure it has not expired. Now we're going to shift and talk about non-program foods. Non-program foods are often referred to as a la carte items. You also have a handout next in your packet. So first, let's talk about the definition of a non-program food. And this is any non-reimbursable food or beverage purchased by you using funds from the nonprofit food service account. It includes the sale of second entrees, milk, snacks, and adult meals. Prices charged must be set high enough to recover food costs. You cannot lose money. There is a calculation form in the handouts. It's called the non-program foods, food costs and selling prices. So if you want to take that out and look at that chart, there's 3 sections to complete on this worksheet. There's a section for milk, entree, and a la carte sales. You'll use your invoice pricing to fill in the item, brand, purchase unit, or serving size and price. Then you configure the cost per serving and the selling price. Your selling price needs to be equal or higher than the cost. Keep in mind inflation and rising food costs, so a recommendation would be to round the selling price up to cover the cost. You must keep the calculations on file along with the invoices used for the calculations. We do ask to see this documentation in an administrative review. Adult meal prices are released annually by NDE, which we will discuss more in the next slide. The food service program cannot financially support the sale of non-program food items and non-reimbursable meals. This means federal dollars cannot be used to support the sale of these items. So let's take a little deeper look at that adult meal pricing. So for school year 23-24, reimbursement rates and the value of donated foods have been published. So on this screen, you can see our calculations for this year. So for adult lunches, our recommendation is that you set the price at $4.60, and for adult breakfast at $2.75. You want to review the school year 23-24 setting meal price guidance document. This was sent out by email and is also posted on our webpage for additional meal pricing information. School food authorities must set the adult meal price at the value recommended in the setting meal price document or on the screen. These prices must be identified in number 9 of the site application for the program. NDE Nutrition Services reviews the reported adult meal prices and confirms that general funds are used to support the school nutrition program if the adult meal prices are not set appropriately. Adult meals priced lower than the recommended value require a non-federal funding source to make up the difference. This is evaluated during an administrative review of the school nutrition program and may require corrective action if the price is not set appropriately. As we move on to the competitive foods policy, Nebraska's competitive foods policy, this is a policy designed to assure healthy foods and meals for children are provided during the school day. Schools who participate in the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program are required to adhere to the policy. So you can find the handout in your packet of the Nebraska Competitive Food Policy. You might be asking yourself, what are competitive foods? So competitive foods are foods sold at school during meal times, and the nonprofit school food service account does not receive the proceeds from those sales. So in other words, these foods are sold in competition with the school meals program. The policy identifies when foods can be sold. Competitive food sales are prohibited from 1/2 hour before meal service until 1/2 hour after meal service. This applies to breakfast and lunch. So let's say your school has a vending machine managed by the student council. It must be turned off during those times. Reimbursement can be withheld from schools in violation of this policy. So items sold as smart snacks are also considered to be non-program foods. The next 2 slides are pictures of handouts that are very useful when determining if an item meets smart snacks guidelines. This handout and more information is available on our webpage. If you have questions at any time about smart snacks, be sure to contact Nutrition Services. So let's talk through some of the smart snack guidelines. If your school does allow food and beverages to be sold during the day at times other than the meal times, smart snack regulations specify what foods or beverages can be sold during the school day on the school campus. So some definitions of the school day is defined as midnight the night before until 30 minutes after the end of the school day. And a school campus is defined as all property under the jurisdiction of the school that are accessible to the students during the day. So let's go back to that student council vending machine for an example. If they wanted it turned on 1/2 hour after breakfast and lunch, so they could sell during the day, the items in the machine must meet Smart Snack standard. So let's look at how to determine if items are Smart Snack compliant. The decision chart handout shown here is the first of 2 Smart Snack handouts in your packet. It defines the standards for Smart Snacks as you see here, and beverages on the second side. You can see the snack must not exceed nutrient standards and additionally meet ingredient criteria. If you have a food item, look at the nutritional label and the ingredient list on the item, then use this chart to determine if it falls within the required limit. On the second page, the beverage guide goes into greater detail listing beverages allowed and maximum sizes. This information is presented by grade groups. These handouts are guides to help you determine if an item meets Smart Snack standards and can be sold. In addition to the handouts, you can utilize the Smart Snack calculator on the Alliance for a Healthier Generation website. The calculator will ask for some information on the product and then tell you if it meets Smart Snack standards. By using these 2 tools, you can offer compliant Smart Snacks that can be sold during the school day at your establishment. Up next, we're going to talk about procurement. And I believe I'm handing the slides back to Sean.
You sure are. Thank you, Allie. So let's talk about procurement. Procurement is the process of receiving goods and services. So in order to receive federal reimbursement, our SFAs and institutions must follow the federal procurement regulations. All procurement must be conducted in a manner that promotes full and open competition. And this is because you must be a good steward of our taxpayer dollars. Because you are receiving federal reimbursement, you must follow all of the federal procurement rules. So let's go to the next slide. Well, there are a lot of federal regulations pertaining to procurement, and these are found on our website. One of our favorite resources is the Indirect Cost Guidelines for State Agencies and School Food Authorities, because it outlines what are allowable and unallowable costs to the program. So in essence, it must be a necessary service or a product to be an allowable cost. So the program would not operate without that product or service. An unallowable cost would be deemed something that isn't necessary to the program. So lots of federal regulations pertaining to procuring goods and services. Next slide. So it's a multi-step process of procuring goods, products, and services. So for our food service folks, the steps involved would be planning your menus. You would determine the products needed for the menus. You would forecast the necessary quantities of each food product or service. You would develop product descriptions and quality standards for those items. You would establish your delivery schedules and inventory management to manage when you receive the product and how much you would keep on hand. Next slide. And then you would determine the proper procurement method and create the solicitation documents. So which procurement method, which we will go into next on the next slide, you contact your potential vendors to, nope, let's go back, Allie, to the previous slide. Contact potential vendors to obtain competitive offers. Evaluate the vendor's responses. Select the vendor that is most responsive and responsible with consideration of price. So who is going to meet your needs the most? And then price is always a consideration because you are paying for those items with federal dollars. This is a very simplistic view of procurement. And then, of course, managing the contractor purchasing process. So price is always a consideration, taking into mind delivery schedules, who is going to meet your needs the most with the products that they have. So let's move to the next slide then. So what are the procurement methods? Well, we have the small purchase threshold, and the federal and state threshold is $250,000 for small purchase threshold. And we can look at this slide, and it's included in your handout packet. Are we going to do informal purchasing or formal purchasing? Now let's start with formal purchasing. That would be required anytime the value of a contract is over $250,000. So that can be in the form of a sealed bid, which is often called an IFB. And it's also in the form of a request for proposal, an RFP, which we're most familiar with. So an IFB is when price is the primary consideration. Now we're going to choose the lowest price for the goods and services we want. Or for an RFP, it is when we develop different specifications within, and we ask for proposals to come back, and we do an evaluation based on different criteria that is indicated and weighted in our RFPs. So most of us will not be doing formal procurement. On the other side is the informal procurement, and that's divided into two different sections. Micro purchases, for those purchases that we make that are under $10,000, which are probably most of our school districts are making micro purchases. And the requirement for a micro purchase is you're spreading the wealth. You're distributing equitably among suppliers. So perhaps you're purchasing from Cisco, you're also purchasing from US Foods, you purchase from maybe from Cisco, you have different vendors that you're purchasing from. And then on the other side, we have small purchases. And small purchases require price quotes from at least 3 different vendors. So if we are purchasing exclusively our bread from, let's say, Rotilla's, then we need to have at least 3 different bids for bread, because we're buying one product and we're going to buy it from one vendor. And so we would obtain 3 different quotes. And a quote can be, contacting the vendor by phone and saying, what you need, and documenting that conversation, what you're told, or sending it to the bread company, and they are responding with their pricing. For milk, you're only purchasing milk probably from one vendor, and so you would need to at least check with 3 different bidders. And I know in Nebraska, we are kind of limited on vendors, and so that could be comparing how much it would cost to get milk from maybe a big distributor like your US Foods or Cashway, and then how much it would cost to get it from Highland, taking into consideration your delivery times, frequency of deliveries, those types of things. And then for large equipment valued over $5,000, typically, unless your district has a smaller threshold for procuring equipment, then doing the 3 bids in a buy, looking at how much it would cost for the same piece of equipment from 3 different vendors. USDA does have a good manual that explains procurement, and it is listed at the bottom of the slide. That's a hyperlink that will take you to that manual that explains this a little bit more in depth. So let's move to the next slide. So USDA requires that our agency, the state agency, conduct what's called procurement reviews. And these are conducted at the same time as the administrative review. And so when we are conducting a procurement review, we're looking at the purchasing practices of the food service program. Part of the review entails that there must be a code of conduct, and a code of conduct is ethical practices that are done in procuring the goods and services. So, an example of an unethical practice would be, well, because my brother sells equipment and he's my brother, I'm only going to buy my equipment from my brother. That would be an unethical practice. And then every school food service must have a procurement plan, and that could be a district plan as well, but it pertains to the school meals program. So there has to be some indication that it includes a school food service program. So the procurement plan is your procurement method. What, you do this is what you do. And we provide templates of what a code of conduct is and a procurement plan. We've been doing procurement reviews now for probably close to 10 years. And so every district has been reviewed and has a code of conduct procurement plan. Maybe they're utilizing our template and have made it their own, but we will be asking for, during a procurement review, we would be asking for those plans to be submitted. And then the final part of a procurement review is we're going to be reviewing your purchasing practices and your past practices. So we're going to be asking for your invoices for the previous year to see, who you're procuring for, if there's any unallowable purchasing going on, an unallowable purchase would be like perhaps maybe, I'm using an example from the past that we've seen, coffee, okay? And coffee is purchased, and maybe it's for your students, your senior high students, but we'd be asking, who are you purchasing the coffee for? And in my example, they were purchasing it for the teacher's lounge and not receiving a payback for that coffee from the general fund. So that would be an unallowable purchase because money wasn't coming back into the program for the cost of that purchase. So we also look at those invoices. We provide technical assistance. If there's something that has to be paid back into the program, then that's found during the procurement review. So next slide, and we have included in your handout packet, let me get to that page. we've included your procurement methods, and during a procurement review, we would be providing those templates just to ensure that your district has those on file. So let's move into the Buy American provision, which is part of procurement. And the Buy American provision just simply states all food procurement transactions using funds from the nonprofit food service account must comply with the Buy American provision. And you have that in your handout packet on page 98. Exceptions for not buying products that are domestically produced food products would be that they're not manufactured in the US in sufficient and reasonable quantities or of a sanitary or satisfactory quality. So let's think of some exceptions to the Buy American provision. Well, bananas. Bananas would be a food product that aren't grown or manufactured in the US in sufficient and reasonable quantities. And so that would be an exception to the Buy American provision. Another example would be pineapple. It's not grown in sufficient quantities. And so those would be exceptions to the Buy American provision. Now, could I substitute another fruit for pineapple? Could I substitute another fruit for bananas? Yes, but based on student preference, those are items that I want to have on my menu. And so I would complete the Buy American justification form that's in your handout packet that would provide me that exception for Buy American. So competitive bids reveal that the cost of the US product is significantly higher than the non-domestic product. So maybe pineapple is grown in the United States, but it would be so expensive to purchase that particular product that it's an exception to the Buy American. You must keep documentation to justify the use of any exceptions, price availability, and domestic alternative substitutes. So, for example, maybe another one that's kind of common is during the winter. No, tomatoes are not available in the United States, and so they are a product of Mexico, for example. And I need tomatoes on my fruit and vegetable bar. So that would be a justification for the Buy American exception. And when we do a review, we are looking in storerooms to see if the items that are on your shelves are in compliance with the Buy American provision. So it's certainly that all vendors are aware that schools have to be in compliance with the Buy American provision, but sometimes it happens when items are substituted. I know, for an example, I was in a storeroom and I saw a product on the shelf that wasn't Buy American, and it was a substituted item. And so you do want to make sure that when you're receiving items that you're looking for where they are from. All products have to be labeled with where they are from, and if you need to complete a Buy American justification form. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Erica to talk about supply chain assistance funds.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so now we're going to talk about supply chain assistance funding, or you may have seen the acronym SCA for supply chain assistance. And all schools are probably pretty familiar with these funds now at this point. They were first distributed to SFAs or schools in school year 21-22. And you could use these funds to purchase, they could only be used to purchase unprocessed or minimally processed food items. And I know a lot of schools use those to purchase milk. You do need to maintain receipts and invoices for review and audit purposes. So keep a spreadsheet of the supply chain assistance funds you've been awarded. Make sure you keep the invoices to show that you've been using those only for those unprocessed or minimally processed food items, and keep track, as you pay those invoices down, that you're using those supply chain assistance funds to pay for those invoices. You do also need to adhere to the Buy American provision. Sean just went over that, so you're familiar with what that is, but when you're using these supply chain assistance funds, you do need to adhere to the Buy American provision for any purchases using the supply chain assistance funds. And good news, USDA has released round 4 of supply chain assistance funds for school year 23-24. And you will have to apply for these funds. So you will be getting communication from our office on how to do that. You'll need to apply for these funds just like you did those first rounds of funds. And that communication will be coming later this school year. So towards the beginning of the school year, but later on this school year, you'll be getting communication from our office on how to apply for these and what your award would be for your specific school. Next slide. The other program we wanted to bring to your attention was the USDA Foods program, or some of you might know it as commodities. It's where you get your brown box item or your F-Favors or Department of Defense fresh fruit and vegetable program. This program is administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, so it is a separate department from us here at the Department of Education. They distribute your entitlement dollars for the purchase of domestic agriculture food products in schools and institutions, and you'll need to use these entitlement dollars annually. So over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see we've listed the USDA Foods website. That's where you can go to log in and find your entitlement. If you're new to the program, a new food service director, you should reach out to either Chad Moore or Brian Gerkensmeyer to make sure that you have your login and everything is set up the way that you need to be able to access this USDA Foods program. Like I said, it's a different website than our website. It's a different system than our system. So we do not have access to that here at the Department of Ed. You would need to reach out to these people in order to gain access to that site. In your handout packet, we have listed that information and their contact information for you. These entitlement dollars are, like I said, they need to be used annually. It's, basic free money to your school to be able to use these foods. So if you don't use it, you just lose it. It doesn't roll over from year to year. So really important to make sure that you're up to date on your USDA foods and your entitlement, what all has been allocated for this school year, and make sure everything is set up the way that you want it. Next slide. We have been asking in the past couple and in-person training. So if you've already filled out our new food service director sheet at either an in-person training or at one of the first 2 Zoom trainings, either on Tuesday or Wednesday, you don't need to fill it out again, but I am going to try to, I may have just, I think I just lost the link for the new food for the Google sheet. I'm sorry. Allie may have to stop sharing here for a minute, but she's going to post the link to the Google sheet in the chat. And we would like you to fill out your name, your title, your school name, and your school phone number, and your email in the Google sheet. Once again, if we don't use abbreviations for your school name, make sure we can recognize what your school name is. Were you able to get that in there?
Yep, just give me
Allie,
1 second.
okay, thank
Yep.
you. Sorry, something happened when I went to, to copy and paste. So if you're a new food service director, we want you to fill out that Google Sheet. That way we can provide you some one-on-one kind of help or assistance as the new school year gets started. Another way that we know if you're a new food service director, if we could go to the next slide, is when you fill out the school meals application. We have 3 people identified on the school meals application. We have your authorized representative, your food service director, and the claim contact. This information is important to be up to date. Some food service directors fill out the school meals application online, but a lot of times it may be your bookkeeper who is filling out this school meals application online. So just make sure they know to check this box. You can see if you're a new food service director here, number 19, check if new. And that also helps us generate a list of any new food service directors, as long as new authorized representatives and claim contacts. It is important for this information to be up to date, especially your email addresses. Any communication from our office, from Katie, all those important emails that she sends out, those email lists are generated from this sponsor application here. So make sure your email address is correct and up to date in this application. All the emails we send out, in regards to training, or like I said, if Katie has an important update that she sends out, it's generated from this sponsor application from these 3, and it's sent to all 3 of these email addresses listed in your sponsor application. Most schools are in the process right now of filling out their school year 23-24 application. And so we'll have that up-to-date information and know who all is new and have all of your new email addresses if you are new. Next slide. With that, we are going to continue with the after-school snack program and special milk program. So the purpose of the after-school snack program is to provide care in after-school settings. The program must be organized to provide children with regularly scheduled activities in a setting that is structured and supervised. And eligible programs must offer educational or enrichment activities. The program must be operated by a school food authority, where at least one school participates in the National School Lunch Program. You can only serve snacks after the end of the school day, so you can't serve snacks until the school day is over. And operators must complete production records and obtain an accurate point of service meal count where the snack is provided to support the claim for reimbursement. This means that you need to have a way of determining if children are present on a given day, such as a roster or a sign-in sheet. And you do need to conduct 2 on-site reviews during each school year. The first review must be conducted within the first 4 weeks of the program start date. You need to meet meal pattern and maintain food safety and ensure potable water is available to students. And we'll go through all of these a little bit more in depth coming up here. Since this program is often operated by others, you do need to make sure that it's administered correctly. So a school district or an RCCI, which participates in the National School Lunch Program, has to offer the after-school care program, like I said, but the program does not have to use the school district's personnel or regular school facilities. So the school district or RCCI must retain final administrative and management responsibility of the program, including the program site. Next slide. Schools qualify for snack reimbursement based on the number of paid, free, and reduced price children enrolled in the school. Schools may claim 1 snack per child per day, and snacks are claimed as free based on area eligibility, or they're claimed as free, reduced, and paid based on non-area eligibility. For area eligibility, sites must be located in areas served by a school or a RCCI in which at least 50% of the enrolled children are eligible for free and reduced price meals. And we verify that using your most recent October claim data. And all students under area eligibility, all students receive snacks at no cost, so at no charge. And then you're going to claim those snacks, all of those snacks, at the free rate of reimbursement. Next slide. Another way to qualify under area eligibility is based on being attendance area eligibility. So in this case, you must document the site is located in the attendance area of a school where at least 50% of the enrolled children are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Once again, all students will still receive snack at no cost, and you'll still claim all of those snacks at the free rate of reimbursement. Next slide. For non-area eligibility, if your site is located in an area served by a school or an RCCI in which less than 50% of the enrolled children are certified eligible for free or reduced price meals, then you could still participate in the program, but you would claim those snacks at the free, reduced, and paid rates of reimbursement. And then for non-area eligibility, you can implement either a pricing or a non-pricing program, which I'll talk about next here. Next slide. So if you're a non-area eligible site and you're implementing a pricing program, then snacks will be claimed in their respective categories, free, reduced, and paid. And then students are charged based on their eligibility status. So free eligible students receive their snack at no charge. Reduced priced eligible students are charged no more than 15 cents per snack. So that's the price for a reduced snack would be 15 cents. And then paid students pay the price that's determined by your school or facility. Next slide. For a non-area eligible site implementing a non-pricing program, snacks are still claimed in their respective categories, free, reduced, and paid, but students receive their snacks at no charge. However, there has to be a way to pay for those snacks. So the snacks either have to be paid from non-program funds, either non-federal funds or general funds that cannot come out of your school meals account. You would have to find another funding source if you were going to implement a non-pricing program. Next slide. School districts and RCCIs must notify NDE Nutrition Services of their intent to participate in the after-school snack program. If you have never had an after-school snack program before and you're wanting to start one, then the very first time that you want to begin the program, you do need to submit an explanation of the educational or enrichment component of the program to NDE Nutrition Services. But after that, once it's approved, each program site that is eligible to participate in the after-school care program must complete the appropriate sections in our system, our CMP system of your site applications, your sponsor and site applications. So you can see here on the screen, we have an example of a school that is participating in the after-school snack program. Under participating programs number 1, they've marked C, after-school snack program, and that will then populate the after-school care programs section of the school meals application. So in there, you'll enter your operational dates. So your start date and end date, those need to be the dates that you are actually operating school, so not before or after your first or last day of school. The days that you're serving snack and claiming those for reimbursement. Your snack time, remember you can't serve your snack until after the school day ends. What your point of service count, what you're using for a point of service count, and then whether based on your free, reduced, and paid percentages, whether you're area eligible or non-area eligible. And if you're area eligible, whether it's based on the particular site you're filling out the application for or another qualifying site. And then for C7, you'll mark which enrichment programs that students are participating in at that site. Can we go to slide 62, the reimbursement rates? Thank you. So for school year 23-24, the reimbursement rates for the after school snack program for free snacks, for snacks you're claiming as free, you'll get $1.17 for each free snack you serve. You'll get 58 cents for each reduced snack you serve, and then 10 cents for each paid snack you serve. So if you're a non-area eligible site and you have a lot of paid students, just keep in mind that you're only going to be getting 10 cents for each paid snack that you serve. Next slide. We do have several after-school snack resources available on our website and also included in your handout packet. But to find the after-school snack section of our website, you can go under the school meals program and then click on after-school snacks. And that'll take you to our after-school snacks page with, like I said, all the forms that are listed in your handout packet are available on this website, as well as some additional information. Next slide. So let's dive a little bit more into what you need to do as the menu planner and as the food service director. So there is a meal pattern for after school snack. And for this meal pattern, you have to serve at least 2 different components in their full required portion sizes out of the following 4 food components listed here. So there's 4 food components. They're milk, vegetables and fruit are 1 component, grains, and meat alternate. The serving size for milk is 1 cup or 8 fluid ounces. The serving size for fruits and vegetables is 3/4 of a cup. So keep that in mind, especially because a lot of those juice cups or fruit cups are not 3/4 cup portions, and you do have to offer the full portion size. So if you're serving fruits and vegetables as one of the components, you need to offer the full 3/4 cup portion size. The serving size for grains is a 1 ounce equivalent, and for meat alternate, it is 1 ounce. There is no offers versus serve in this meal pattern, so students need to leave the point of service with 2 different components in the full serving size. Next slide. So this just shows an example of what is in an after-school snack. So you would need to pick 2 out of the milk, meat alternate, vegetable and fruit, and grain component. So this sample snack we have here has 3/4 cup of mandarin oranges. Now, like I just said, a lot of fruit cups are only 1/2 cup. So keep that in mind. You need to serve the full 3/4 cup of fruits or vegetables if you're going to use that as one of your components. And then they have a 1 ounce equivalent of crackers. So this was an example, a sample of a reimbursable after school snack. Next slide. We have included your meal pattern chart in your handout packet, and it's also available in our website. For milk, it has to be fluid, and it should be 1% or skim flavored or unflavored milk. For fruits and vegetables, it has to be a fresh, a fruit or vegetable or full strength fruit juice or full strength vegetable juice. For grains, a serving is equal to a 1 ounce equivalent. And then for meat alternate, there are several different options listed, and those are the meat alternate component needs to be equal to a 1 ounce equivalent. Next slide. So just a few meal pattern reminders. There is no offer versus serve. So like I said, all students need to leave that point of service with both components in the full required portion sizes. They have to take 2 components. You cannot serve only 2 foods from the same component. So an example of this is like fruit juice and carrots. Both of those foods are from the vegetable and fruit component. So that would really only count as 1 component. You need to serve 2 different components. And then snacks cannot be only fluids. So you cannot serve just juice and milk as a snack. That would not be a reimbursable snack. It needs to be more substantial than that. So you cannot have only juice and milk as a reimbursable snack. Next slide. Just like with our other meal patterns, there are non-creditable food items. So non-creditable foods such as potato chips, pudding, ice cream, gelatin, cream cheese, bacon, and fruit roll-ups cannot credit in the after-school snack program. Sometimes I know people have gotten confused between smart snacks and after-school snacks because some, you can sell some of these fruit snacks and things as a smart snack item, but they are not a creditable fruit component in the after-school snack program. So just keep that in mind. We do have a list of creditable and non-creditable foods for the after-school snack program available on our website as well. Next slide. And once again, just like breakfast and lunch for the after-school snack program, you do have to have free potable water available during snack service. However, water is not a meal pattern component. So you can't serve water as one of your components. You can serve like water and crackers and have it count as a reimbursable after-school snack. But you do need to have it available. A lot of schools implement this either with a pitcher, of water with water cups available. If you have a water fountain wherever you're serving the after school snack, that's okay, but you do also need to have cups available as well. Next slide. And if you're wanting some ideas for after school snack ideas, we have included in your handout packet a full page of after school snacks that would be reimbursable for grades K through 12. Oftentimes we do see like a milk component and a grain component. And I think this is because, like I said before, you're maybe preparing this ahead of time and then it's being served later by other staff. So that is, one of the easy things to do is to serve milk and a grain component, but you can serve, there's a lot of other options as well. And just some good ideas available here on that handout and on our website. Next slide. You do need to fill out production records. So this is your proof that you've met meal pattern for the day, that you've planned both of those 2 components in the required serving size, that you've prepared enough for the number of snacks that you served. So you'll want to fill out your site name, what week and year it's for. You'll then fill out your menu for that particular day, the serving size of each component, how many you prepared, how much you started with for each of those components, and then the number of snacks that you served. This production record is available in your handout packet as well as on our website. We will ask to see these as part of an administrative review to demonstrate that you are meeting meal pattern. And once again, if it's not documented, we can't give you credit for it. So if you have missing production records or incomplete production records where you haven't documented all the components or both of the components, then those snacks would be non-reimbursable, or we would not be able to provide reimbursement for those snacks during an administrative review. And we don't want that to happen. So just make sure you're staying up on up to date on your production records and filling these out daily. They are daily. Okay. Next slide. Another really important piece of the after-school snack program is the point of service meal count. Point of service meal counts must be taken at the time each child receives a reimbursable snack. So, they're going through the line, they're picking up both components. Somebody's at the end of that line marking that they've received that reimbursable snack. Snack counts cannot be taken before the snack is served or after snack service is over. So you shouldn't distribute all the snacks and then go around trying to mark a tally of who took a snack and who didn't. Counts based on pre-order numbers or attendance are not allowed. So you can't just use your attendance as proof as your point of service meal count. You need to have a separate form, an actual point of service meal count for your after school snacks. You can use your electronic POS system or a paper count sheet or some other form of an electronic spreadsheet. Just keep in mind, if you're using an electronic system, you need to have a backup because we will ask to see these records at an administrative review, and we don't want anything to happen to those or for you to lose those records. So make sure they're either backed up, on a cloud or an offsite server if you're using an electronic spreadsheet, or that your point of service system has a backup. And then non-area eligible programs. So if you're claiming by free and reduced and paid, you must track the student name and maintain confidentiality to prevent overt identification of eligibility status. So you shouldn't have different, forms of identification based on a student's eligibility status. It should just all be confidential as to who is receiving their snack as free, reduced, and paid. And that's something really important to point out to those staff, especially if it's not your staff that are implementing this program. Next slide. We do have a form available in your handout on your website. So if you're a non-area eligible site and you're claiming those snacks by free, reduced, and paid, there's a monthly snack participation record for snacks claimed as free, reduced, and paid. You list the child's name, whether they were absent, they had snack, or they were present but they didn't take the snack. And then you would total those daily by free, reduced, and paid, and use this to support your claim for reimbursement. So we would ask to see this documentation as well as your claim for reimbursement at an administrative review to support the number of snacks you were claiming. Next slide. As I've said several times, staff training in this program is really important. Often the staff operating the snack service are different than those working in maybe your school meals program. So it might be 20th Century Grant staff or other staff that are just employees of the organization that's operating the after school snack program or the after school program. And they do need to be trained on program requirements, and this must be documented with names, dates, and signatures, and the topics that you cover. Next slide. So staff training, the required topics that you would want to go over with them would be an overview of the program and the purpose of the after school snack program. Of course, your meal counting and claiming procedures, that's really important because that's how you're going to receive reimbursement for those snacks. So they need to know exactly how to do that. Those meal pattern requirements that all students need to leave that line with 2 components in the full portion sizes. Of course, any food safety and sanitation that you would want them to implement during snack service. And then civil rights training also needs to be conducted for any staff involved in the after school snack program. Next slide. The "And Justice for All" poster does need to be prominently displayed where snack is served. So if they're not serving snack in your cafeteria, they're serving it in another location, the "And Justice for All" poster should be posted in that location. If you do need additional posters, there is a form to complete on our webpage, a material order form, and you can order more and Justice for All posters if you need more posters for your after-school snack sites. Next slide. As I said, you do need to conduct 2 on-site reviews each school year. That on-site review summary form is available in your handout packet and on our website. It's important that you complete that first review within the first 4 weeks of operation. You want to identify any meal counting, errors or any meal pattern errors right away so that those don't continue on throughout the school year. So completing this in the first 4 weeks of operation is important. And then you can complete the second one later on during the school year, but you do need to complete 2 on-site reviews and keep these forms on file with your after-school snack, production records and that information. We will ask to see these monitoring forms at an administrative review. And last slide on our after-school snack program is the documentation that you need to keep. So we will want you to keep your menu, your production records, any labels for your grain items and your meat alternate items. If you were on yesterday, we talked about CN labels and product formulation statements, your invoices for the items you've purchased for the after-school snack care program. We want to see your daily meal counts and your consolidated meal counts for filing the monthly claim for reimbursement, your attendance records, those monitoring forms. All of these records need to be saved for 3 years plus the current year. So just like all your other record keeping requirements, 3 years plus the current year for these records as well. Next slide. So next, we're going to talk about the special milk program. The special milk program is for school systems who want to apply to participate if you have students in the school who do not have access to school meals. So this would be available for half-day preschoolers or students who do not have access to meals. They can't have access to breakfast or to lunch in order to participate in this program. So they're coming to school during a time, when they don't participate in breakfast and they don't participate in lunch. That's the only time that you would be able to implement the special milk program. Typically, it's those younger grades. So for those 2 to 5-year-olds, you can only offer that 1% or skim unflavored milk for the special milk program for school for ages 2 to 5. You do need to operate this program on a nonprofit basis, and I'll talk about that pricing kind of structure coming up here, but you should use the reimbursement that you're receiving for the milk to kind of offset the cost of the milk. So it wouldn't necessarily be, charging students the full, 50 cents or 60 cents or whatever you charge as an extra milk. You're trying to operate it on a nonprofit basis to provide the milk to the students. And there are 2 program options for participating. You either charge all households and claim all your milk is paid, or you're going to keep track of eligibility documentation and claim your milk as paid and free. There is no reduced milk in the special milk program, so the only 2 options are paid and free. If you have a reduced student, those would fall under the paid category. On the bottom of the slide is the hyperlink to our special milk program page on our website. And I do show a slide of that coming up here, so we'll talk about that a little bit more, but there is a special milk section on our website as well. Next slide. So who pays for this milk? Well, you're either going to charge all households for the milk, or you're going to determine who will pay for the milk, and you need to use a non-program funding source for that as well. So once again, that can't come out of your nonprofit school food service account. It would have to be non-program funding. So either general funds or another non-federal funding source if you were going to implement a non-pricing program and none of the students pay for their milk. How much do you charge? Well, under a pricing plan, the milk is sold to children with the reimbursement utilized to keep the cost low. So you need to know your dairy price, and it's not what's charged for your extra milk. The half pint price should reflect the difference between the federal reimbursement and the cost to operate the program. So the reimbursement rate for school year 23-24 is 0.2625 cents per half pint. So let's say your dairy cost is 35 cents per half pint, and your administrative and supply costs to operate the special milk program are 5 cents per half pint. Then, that'd give you about 40 cents for your cost. Subtract that from the reimbursement that you'll receive. And so your dairy, or the price to the students, could be around 15 cents per half pint of milk. So you're taking your cost minus the cost of the reimbursement rate that you receive, and somewhere around there, that difference should be the price that you're charging to the students. You do need to keep a point of service meal count. That is required. So you need to document milk as the students receive it, just like with all of our other programs. After they've received their milk, you're keeping your point of service meal count and the records that each student for that day has received milk. Of course, you can't use attendance records or counts taken before or before the milk is served. And then the bottom portion of the slide here shows submitting a claim for reimbursement. So if you're determining free eligibility, you'll need to keep track of how many free and paid milks that you serve. And if you're determining free eligibility, you do also need to know your average cost per half pint, and you're reimbursed at your dairy cost for free milk. So keep those milk invoices on file. During an administrative review, we will ask to see this documentation and verify that the average cost per half pint that you're claiming is correct. And then if you're just claiming paid milk, then you would just enter the number of paid milks that you serve. So it would look a little bit different than this claim here. Next slide. As I said, we do have a special milk program section on our website. To get to that, you're going to go under the school meals program. You're going to click on special milk program, and it's going to take you to some more information about the special milk program. There is a PowerPoint presentation for special milk program that goes more in depth than what we did today on the special milk program. So if you operate the special milk program, there's already a PowerPoint and a presentation out there available, created by our specialist who works in the special milk program. So that's a good resource too as well. So I pointed to that with the red arrow as well. Next slide. Once again, if you haven't already, if you're a new food service director and we want you to enter that information into that Google Sheet, and just another reminder, I see Allie just put that Google Sheet there. So if you're a new food service director, that was just posted by Allie Lampman in the chat. Click on that link and fill out your information. Just another important reminder to make sure that school meals application is up to date. We talked about that earlier in the presentation. We want to have everybody's correct email addresses, and we want you to mark if you're new on that school meals application. Any communication from our office is generated from those. So with that, that is all we have as far as slides to present to you today.